I'm sure that many of you that stumbled onto old school RuneScape and never played the game feel baffled at the amount of success the game has. How could a point and click game that you ran on your browser in 2007 with graphics that would be terrible even in that time period consistently pulls over 100,000 concurrent players? At the time of recording this video, the game would rank top 5 on Steam's daily most played games list, and those who don't play the game will never understand why. As someone who played the game from 2006 up until today, I'll show you why Old School RuneScape is such a great game and why you never got it. Old School RuneScape is a snapshot from 2007 of the original RuneScape that was brought back to life in February 2013. It was brought back after many players quit the main RuneScape game due to a lot of controversial updates. It's very easy to write off the success of osrs as people who are being nostalgic and trying to relive their childhood. As amazing as the game was for me as a child, that nostalgia runs out really quick, and no game, no matter how much nostalgia it would carry, can survive for 10 years solely on nostalgia. In fact, the game initially lost a lot of players due to loss of interest, lack of content, and key quality of life features missing in the game. So if it's not only nostalgia, why are people playing an aging point-and-click idle game? I do agree that osrs is to a certain extent an idle game and maybe the first in its genre, but the endgame content is definitely not point-and-click and not idle. First of all, in many of the boss fights, you need to utilize your movement to avoid attacks and kite them. To mitigate or completely remove damage, you need to correctly time your prayer switches in matters of less than a second. The game also has a mechanic where you need to switch your gear very quickly to fit the current offensive or defensive stats of the boss you're fighting. The same could be said about PvP, which has many variations and employs the same skills I just mentioned and even more. To the uninitiated, osrs could look like a simple point-and-click game where you just press left click and the boss dies after a couple of seconds, but in reality the game has a very high skill ceiling in both PvM and PvP. That could easily take you a half a year to master and employ at the higher end, and that's even if you already have a fully maxed out account. You can try for yourself in many of the private osrs servers that let you jump into PvP and PvM instantly without the need to level up an account. I guarantee you it will take you a lot of time to master it. The game having the nostalgic factor and challenging content is still not enough in my opinion to carry it for over 10 years. So what else are you missing? Old School RuneScape has a unique approach for adding new content. First of all, every update that is not a critical fix or an exploit patch has to go through a vote and get 70% of the votes from the community to pass. Considering the history of the game and how players left the original RuneScape after controversial updates where they had very little input if any, this measure really helps combat that. New content is not only being voted on, but in many of the cases, it's suggested by the community. You can find many of the updates already in the game in old Reddit posts or as suggestions thrown in the weekly dev livestream. Not only that, but one of the lead mods of the game named Mod Ash answers and replies to every single tweet from the community daily. I myself have tweeted at him at least 10 times with questions or suggestions, and without fail he replied to all of them. The other thing that I believe osrs does the best is keeping old content relevant and avoiding power creep. So for those of you that are not familiar with it, power creep is a term that describes the phenomenon of games constantly pushing new content that is stronger than what was previously available for the same level or niche. To extremely simplify it, imagine a sword that does 1 damage for level 10 players. Then I introduce one more sword for level 10 players that does 2 damage but attacks twice as slow. After introducing several new swords in this level, eventually every niche and trade-off will be covered. So if I ever want to release more new content, I will have to release swords that would be stronger and obsolete the old ones, which then makes all the old swords dead content. Why use the old level 10 sword with 1 damage when I can use the new level 10 sword that does 2 damage with the same attack speed? That's a very dumbed down version of power creep, and if you want to take a look at a real life example, just look at League of Legends constantly releasing new champions, which makes the champ pool completely unbalanced and obsoletes in the process a lot of older champions. In osrs, luckily, the community is very vigilant and will provide pushback against power creep. It's not 100% successful, but if at any point an item is too OP or some form of content is disincentivized by a new update, the old content usually gets a revision or a buff to keep it relevant. There is definitely power creep and dead content in OSRS, but I would say it's easily in the top 5 list for games that fight power creep effectively and has very little amount of dead content. One last thing that does the game a huge favor in my opinion is that it has a good mobile version, and due to the absolute hot garbage MTX filled mobile gaming space, it really shines through being one of the few non-pay to win free games. I also like to caveat that with the fact that you can actually buy in-game currency in a roundabout way. If you buy membership bonds, you can either trade them for 14 days of membership in the game, or you can sell it or give it to other players. I think it's a good trade-off because if you become a good enough player, you can negate the membership cost entirely and play the premium content in the game for free by buying membership bonds from other players and not purchasing the membership from Jagex directly. Considering the fact that the best gear in the game costs billions of coins and the membership bonds can get you barely less than 10 million, it's a good trade-off. So if you reach this point of the video, you probably wonder how a game this good, at least on paper, doesn't have more players. First of all, if you had to watch a video explaining why the game is good, it doesn't have good marketability. And there's sadly not a lot you can do about it because of the point and click stigma the game has. Combine it with the fact that the vanilla client has bad graphics even in the standards of 2007, and you already lost a lot of potential players. One more issue the game has in terms of recruiting other players is that most of the fun content is under a paywall, and there's no trial access to that. Sadly, any previous attempt to give new players access to a trial membership for a few days was instantly taken advantage of by bot farms, who often create a ton of accounts that get the membership trial and farm the in-game gold to sell it for real-life money, which really hurts the game economy and it's strictly forbidden in the game. One good idea I had was to make any item you retain during the trial untradeable unless you pay for a full membership. That way bot farms can farm the items and trade them away for real gold unless they pay for a membership, and I can't think of a single bot farmer who's brazen enough to attach a payment method to their account. So to sum all of it up, the game has a lot of high-end content that is both entertaining and challenging, and the nostalgia factor for many players who grew up playing the game, which at 2008, believe it or not, had the Guinness World Record for the most popular free MMORPG. So initially there was a large pool of nostalgic players to draw from. The devs for the game are very accessible to the community and take in a lot of suggestions that usually end up in the game. And any major update that is introduced to the game needs 70% of the vote to pass through. The game handles that content pretty well since it has a very vigilant community that pushes for nerfs and buffs where relevant to try and minimize power creep or revising old content to keep it alive. The game also has a good mobile version that carries the same progress as the desktop version, and you can play every single piece of content without paying money once you become a good enough player. The downsides of the game is how hard it is to market it for new players and the everlasting bot problem. The lack of trial access to the fun content would probably push away most of the players who are interested in the game but won't take a leap of faith at the price of $12. And that's the biggest issue in the game, at least for me.